Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to all those joining us on the other side of the Atlantic. And welcome to US-Bulgaria Dialogues, the live conversational series created by the Atlantic Club of Bulgaria and the US Embassy in Sofia. In the wake of an animated election in America and the world, we believe it important to compare notes with a major ally of Bulgaria, the United States. We will use this virtual space to explore the fundamental issues critical to democratic governance and economic growth. We kick it off today with a conversation on a most critical topic, the rule of law. And our distinguished interlocutor today is Ms. Jessica Kim, who is the US Department of Justice's resident legal advisor for Bulgaria and Romania. She provides justice sector assistance to building capacity in combating public corruption, money laundering, and organized crime. She also focuses on assessing and promoting procedural and legislative reforms, as well as building support for an effective judiciary to promote the rule of law throughout Bulgaria, Romania, and Central Europe. Ms. Kim is currently on detail from the US Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Ohio, where she has served as an Assistant United States Attorney since 2014. She mostly prosecutes white-collar crimes, including public corruption, investment fraud, corporate fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and cybercrimes. She also prosecutes national security and violent crime offenses. In 2018, Jessica was the department's sole recipient of the Attorney General's Award for Outstanding Contributions by a new employee, which recognizes exceptional performance and notable accomplishments by an employee with fewer than 5 years of federal career service. She had yet another important award back in 2018, when she was awarded the Younger Federal Lawyer Award of the Federal Bar Association. This is a national award for attorneys for outstanding legal ability and commitment to the community. Jessica has a sense of the NGO world too, which makes us at the Atlantic Club particularly happy, because she served on the boards of several philanthropic organizations, including A Kid Again, Children, Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, as well as actually an interesting other affiliation, which was with the Young Professional Board of Central Ohio, and the Pro Music Chamber Orchestra, where she was sustaining board member. Guess what? She's also a 100-mile bike rider and fundraiser. So being a bike rider, she fundraised for cancer research. Ms. Kim is also in academia since 2014. She has served as an adjunct professor of law at Ohio State University, teaching white-collar crime and appellate advocacy. So now we will all say hello to Ms. Kim, to Jessica, and I will shoot off with the first question. I would basically like to ask Jessica to tell us a little bit more about herself and what brought her here, and how does she visualize her work in a country which is thousands of miles away from her own.
Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to double check that you're able to hear me okay?
I do.
Great.
Everybody else.
Thank you so much for the kind and warm introduction. You were so thorough. I do want to mention that I have been a federal prosecutor, as you said, since 2014. I've served as the lead prosecutor in hundreds of federal felony cases, including all the ones you mentioned, as well as civil rights, corruption. And until this assignment, I served as the chief of cyber and IP crimes for my district, which covered 48 counties and approximately 5 million people. This means that I was the lead counsel on all cyber and IP cases. I supervised the collection of digital evidence by prosecutors in my district, and I was responsible for training all prosecutors and investigators in the region on digital evidence. Some of the notable cases that I have prosecuted include the district's first 2 cyberstalking cases under the Violence Against Women Act, including a defendant who is a law enforcement officer, as well as being involved in the district's largest racketeering conspiracy, capital murder case involving tenants, and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act case, which is foreign bribery, involving the company Rolls-Royce, which resulted in an $800 million global criminal penalty, which was shared between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Brazil. And before we get into tasks and goals here in Bulgaria, I must add this professional disclaimer that all of my comments today are my own personal views and not that of the United States Department of State or the US Embassy.
Thank you. That's a very valid remark that you made for last, because I would argue that you are the one here on the ground. So there may be instances when you will be even more knowledgeable than your bosses far away in Washington. And that's really appreciated. Having entered already into the professional scope of your work, can you share with our audience, what are your exact tasks and goals in this country, and what specific assistance can you offer us?
Let me start by commenting on our country's bilateral relationship. Bulgaria is one of the United States' top allies. We enjoy a strong partnership in many areas, including our shared values on the principles of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. These shared values make our country stronger and more resilient to those who seek to threaten or divide us. And the United States is committed to working with our allies to uphold our democratic commitments, including on rule of law and corruption. Strong rule of law is critical for economic growth and success, especially foreign investment. President Biden has long recognized that corruption is a national security issue. For example, corruption makes countries more vulnerable to, among other things, foreign intervention. And these principles, democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law, are what drive my tasks and goals here in Bulgaria. As you said, my team and I focus primarily on providing justice sector assistance to build capacity in combating corruption, as well as the criminal enterprises facilitated by corruption, including money laundering and transnational organized crime. Our overarching goal is to promote the rule of law in Bulgaria and throughout this region. We provide assistance in a number of ways. The first is capacity building, by providing training to prosecutors, investigators, and judges on general and specific topics like digital evidence gathering, financial data analysis, or mutual legal assistance. We listen to what our partners need, and we try to structure the trainings accordingly. And these trainings often feature US-based experts, including American judges, prosecutors, and investigators. In the past year, we've provided over 20 training programs throughout Bulgaria. We also provide case-based mentoring at our partners' request. We advance procedural and legislative reforms, for example, by drafting proposed legislation to better equip the criminal justice sector to combat corruption, or by promoting procedural reforms aimed at increasing judicial independence. We try to build support for an effective judiciary, including by connecting Bulgarian and American judges to cultivate relationships and share knowledge on topics like effective case management. And we support civil society to raise awareness for the important work that they do and continue to raise the quality of public debate in Bulgaria. We're also committed to law school outreach and interacting with as many students as we can to empower the next generation of Bulgaria's rising leaders and to promote rule of law principles.
Thank you. In preparing for this event, which, as I mentioned at the offset, is the first of a series which we intend to maintain, we reached out to various constituencies, asking them to provide questions of interest so that we will be relevant in providing you with a background of what the interests here are. So this is how we compiled the questions which we are asking you today, and kind of had to squeeze them in because it's a really a notion of specific questions and of interest. You should also know that your arrival here was met with a lot of excitement and expectations. You should feel yourself extremely welcome in this country. But one of the questions which were asked was, are there any colleagues of yours in a similar position in other EU countries and serving in an EU country, in EU member state? Do you interact one way or another with EU bodies?
So Bulgaria and Romania, which you said I also cover, are the only EU countries with the Department of Justice resident legal advisor position devoted to those countries. I do have a colleague who's based in Croatia, but they cover the entire Western Balkans region, not Croatia. I also have a number of colleagues in similar positions in other European countries, including North Macedonia, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, and Kosovo, with the ultimate goal being EU accession. And as for interaction with EU bodies, we have contacts and connections, but I hope to cultivate and develop more, especially with the new European Public Prosecutor's Office.
Okay, that gives us food for thought, and we may discuss that further on at a later stage. But since we mentioned the EU, in its 2020 Rule of Law report for Bulgaria, the European Commission has found that our country still faces quote-unquote challenges regarding the quote-unquote effective accountability and criminal liability of the Prosecutor General. As an American prosecutor with experience in Bulgaria, what elements of the US federal and state level prosecution setup would you recommend as a useful model for Bulgarian reforms?
You are just jumping right in with the substantive questions. So as you know, the European Commission reviews the rule of law situation in a number of countries and provides recommendations. So I would first like to note that the 2020 rule of law report for Bulgaria found several challenges, and the accountability and criminal liability of the Prosecutor General was one of many rule of law challenges identified. Other challenges included the composition and function of the Supreme Judicial Council, a lack of judicial independence, very low level of public trust in anti-corruption institutions, a lack of independent media, and some checks and balances issues like limited public consultations in the legislative process and a narrowing space for civil society. I emphasize these because addressing just one challenge will not solve all of the rule of law issues. For reforms to be effective in any country, they must be comprehensive. So now, as an American prosecutor, having spent some time here, I think it's really important to note the major differences between our two countries' criminal justice systems. And I also note that the American model may not be the universally best model. It works for our country, but it's not one size fits all. Other models, perhaps European models, may also be suitable for Bulgaria to mirror. The biggest difference between our criminal justice systems is that in Bulgaria, prosecutors and judges are both part of the judiciary. In the United States, prosecutors and judges are under different branches of government, the executive and the judicial branches. The reality is that prosecutors and judges have separate jobs. A prosecutor is supposed to be an advocate. A judge is supposed to be a neutral arbiter of fact applying the law. And equating the two jobs is perhaps the source of some of Bulgaria's major rule of law challenges. The prosecution has problems. The judiciary is not independent. And that being said, some elements of the US prosecution setup that could be useful for Bulgarian reform can be split into two categories, theoretical and practical. So for theoretical reform, I would recommend a fundamental shift in thinking about the roles of judges and prosecutors in order to increase judicial independence. So for example, creating separate councils for judges and prosecutors, rather than having one Supreme Judicial Council with a Judges College and Prosecutors College. This would increase judicial independence. For practical reforms, I would recommend two elements from the American system. First, give prosecutors and investigators the tools they need to build stronger cases. My understanding is that the Bulgarian Criminal Procedure Code is from 1968, which means that it's 53 years old. It is based on communist penal theory and practice, and it has to be modernized to reflect the democratic system. Second, increase cooperation between investigators and prosecutors to build stronger cases. I cannot stress the strength of a task force approach enough, in which investigators and prosecutors from all services and all levels work together from the very beginning of a case. This type of approach builds strong cases that sustain convictions.
Thank you indeed. And also outlining and probably highlighting the differences in models. But in all due humility, as just a regular citizen, I would say that all the various models in a number of democratic states practically have one and the same goal: to achieve transparency and accountability of the judiciary. And I believe that every good example is only too welcome in any country, including my own. So really thank you for looking into our own system and trying to be helpful. Yet another rather specific question that reached us, and it goes as follows. The 2020 investment climate statements of the US Department of State on Bulgaria found that, quote unquote, corruption is endemic, particularly on large infrastructure projects and in the energy sector, end of quote. How do you define endemic? What do you think are the main institutional and political challenges in tackling this problem?
And again, another tough question. So I would define endemic, especially when it relates to a disease or a condition, as one that is regularly found in a certain specific area. And we can actually compare it to the term pandemic, of which we're all too familiar with in the past year, which is an endemic occurring worldwide and crossing international boundaries. Bulgaria, like many other countries, has a corruption problem. And during this global COVID-19 pandemic, there's been a heavy focus on Bulgaria's own long-running endemic, corruption. Corruption, unfortunately, is hurting Bulgaria's potential. Bulgaria has so much to offer. And over a year here now, I know about its natural. The smart, passionate people who I've had the privilege to get to know, who love their country and want to see it succeed, for it to be recognized for all that it can offer the world. Bulgarians, like any other citizens, want to see businesses thrive and provide high-paying jobs. They want a brighter future for their children and grandchildren. But persistent rule of law challenges are hindering Bulgaria's success. What's missing is the security and confidence that Bulgarians will be treated fairly and predictably under the law. And this is exactly what foreign investors look forward to. Because despite Bulgaria's natural riches, foreign direct investment remains a tiny fraction of the country's GDP, all while those with connections grow wealthier and violate Bulgarian law with impunity. A significant lack of political integrity and insufficient levels of transparency at various levels of the political system have undermined rule of law over decades. Steps to undermine judicial independence have weakened Bulgaria's ability to prosecute high-level corruption. Then you add in oligarchic influence, issues of conflicts of interest, abuse of state resources, and a lack of media independence, and one understands why Bulgaria remains the EU's highest scoring country for corruption. For Bulgaria to reach its full potential, Bulgaria's leaders, no matter what party or level, must first respect the rule of law. Time and time again, Bulgarian governments have relied on its favorable interpretation of a single report or evaluation to check a box and claim improvement. As friends, we know Bulgaria can do better. And they must accept that, unlike the global COVID-19 pandemic, Bulgaria's corruption endemic cannot be treated with a single or double jab vaccine. It's a disease that requires continuous treatment, effort, and will. I think that accountability starts with Bulgaria's leaders in every party and at every level to support the principle that no one is above the law, including themselves. Bulgaria's leaders must then properly address their people's demands for justice and rule of law to increase faith in its democratic system. They must ensure that reforms follow these principles, committing to a nonpartisan, functioning judicial system and effective anti-corruption mechanisms.
2020 was a horrible year, and I think this is one of very few instances, maybe the only one on which we find consensus across the board and across the world. It was bad. In Bulgaria, though, it was coupled with another company. Bulgaria experienced major anti-corruption protests. The US embassy was acclaimed when it said, and again I quote, "We support the Bulgarian people as you peacefully advocate for increased faith in your democratic system and promote the rule of law in Bulgaria. No one is above the law." I would really want to impart something for the sake of our audience. This was still under the previous administration of the US. And is not likely to change with the change of administrations in Washington. So how do you see, in your own personal way, your role in promoting the values of rule of law?
First, my role requires a true understanding of what rule of law is. It's the principle that all people and institutions are subject to and accountable to laws that are fairly applied and enforced. It means setting rules and acting by those rules. Second, it requires understanding why rule of law is important. It's important because it limits the arbitrary power of those in authority, and it keeps public authorities and private actors honest. And the way that I see my role in promoting these values really is by reiterating the sentiments outlined in the embassy's July statement, which emphasize the principles by which we work in all countries, that we support the Bulgarian people as you peacefully advocate for increased faith in your democratic system and promote the rule of law in Bulgaria, because no one is above the law. And my job really boils down to three main things. The first is listening. I've met with and listened to hundreds of Bulgarians in the past year, including government officials, prosecutors, judges, investigators, police officers, legal scholars, academics, young professionals, students, and my favorite, the many Bulgarians whom I've worked with or met socially, gotten to know, and am now privileged to call friends. The second is assessing. It's not my job to judge, but to assess. And this means listening to different views, learning the system, weighing the facts, and using international reports to evaluate areas for improvement. The third is raising awareness. We support the Bulgarian people and their efforts to find avenues for improvement. Of utmost importance is raising awareness and empowering Bulgarians to combat corruption, because Bulgarians cannot rely on the EU or other countries for its success. Bulgaria's future depends not on external funds or resources, but its own determination. And having gotten to know your country and its people a bit this past year, I know Bulgarians can do this. Bulgarians can stop corruption. And this is how I see my role in promoting the values of rule of law.
I don't know whether you have this game in America, but I remember as a kid, we used to play the game of warm, hot, hotter, hottest, when somebody hides an object and the group of kids start looking for it. And when you get closer to the object, they tell you warm, warmer, hot, hotter, until you finally grab it, until you find it. So I'm afraid my next question.
Oh boy.
Range of hot, hotter, hottest. So it's a little bit hotter than the questions we discussed so far. So I'd ask you, what is your assessment of the results of criminal investigations against senior government officials in Bulgaria for corruption-related crimes over the past 5 years? You will give your assessment of the results, but what do you believe are the reasons for these results?
Bulgaria is often criticized for its lack of high-profile corruption convictions. The reasons for such results are outlined in the various international reports, including the European Commission's annual Rule of Law report, the Venice Commission opinion, and the Council of Europe's Greco reports, just to name a few. These reports have identified the main political and institutional challenges that I mentioned before. Put simply, the judiciary is not independent. Steps to undermine judicial independence have weakened Bulgaria's ability to prosecute high-level corruption. There's a lack of political determination to tackle these issues. Bulgarian leaders at all levels know what is needed for real change, but there has been no meaningful change to date. All leaders of all parties and at all levels must be courageous to stand up for what is right, to invoke plans that will produce real results. These challenges, along with the multiple other factors I mentioned before, oligarchic influence, issues of conflicts of interest, abuse of state resources, a lack of media independence, these are all contributing factors. There is a very low level of public trust in Bulgaria's anti-corruption institutions due to a lack of results. And so a solid track record of high-level corruption cases must be established to increase public confidence.
I'll take you back to your awards, which were obviously well-deserved. But what's most interesting is the work that you did, your performance, which brought you these awards. And I'm afraid you've gotten right into a totally men's world with money laundering, with all kinds of fraud, financial crime of any kind of an order. Definitely my part of the world is known for incidents, not even incidents, but I would call it practices of this kind. So obviously we need the cooperation and collaboration of allied countries and the US in the first place in order to combat financial crimes, to put it most generally. So how do you assess this collaboration, especially with all these stories about money laundering and all sorts of different trafficking, which again boils down to illicit money. What's the kind of collaboration you have, including with our specialized agencies and institutions?
As a general matter, there's very strong law enforcement cooperation between our two countries. Like I said before, Bulgaria is one of our top allies. And this is especially true when it comes to this type of collaboration. As recently as yesterday, there was a successful coordinated international law enforcement action to disrupt a sophisticated form of ransomware by the US Department of Justice and Bulgarian law enforcement. With respect to financial intelligence in particular, our countries have undertaken several joint operations in the last few years with excellent results. Our specific capacity building efforts have specifically focused on strengthening financial intelligence capabilities, and this is at our Bulgarian counterparts' request. So for example, we've had several trainings for prosecutors and investigators in the past year on financial data analysis, including open source intelligence, and a very strong law enforcement relationship.
Your engagement with the NGO world, because definitely the NGO sector is of particular importance, especially in a fragile democracy, still struggling with some main concepts of its own development. Media is another very sensitive area to mention here. And I know these are, again tough questions in a tough reality. But still, what do you think about the NGO sector, the non-governmental sector in Bulgaria, and especially, and even more, the media situation and the media freedom in Bulgaria?
I'll start with the non-governmental sector. We work very closely with Bulgarian civil society. The embassy relies heavily on civil society's expertise and recommendations on various rule of law issues. We host a roundtable every quarter with various representatives from different civil society organizations here in Bulgaria to raise awareness and increase the quality of public debate. These roundtables are so important because the best ideas come from these kinds of conversations. And despite limited resources and a narrowing civic space, Bulgarian civil society continues to do excellent work. Turning to media freedom, there is a serious problem with regard to media freedom in Bulgaria. The international evaluations have recognized this. The World Press Freedom Ranking ranks Bulgaria in 111th place, far behind all other EU countries. And the European Commission's Rule of Law report noted that there's a lack of transparency of media ownership and financing, and that there have been serious physical and online attacks on journalists. I do think it's helpful that the new annual Rule of Law report by the European Commission includes civil society and media freedom aspects, which highlights these issues to raise awareness and hopefully for.
I now come to what I would like to ask is probably a last question for today, but which I feel very strongly about. We witnessed, you survived your most recent presidential election. Much to my regret and disappointment, there were interested groups in this country who wanted to kind of insist and impart at any cost that actually the democratic system, the democratic institutions in America and the election bodies in Bulgaria, in America, did not function, as if the democratic election system in America was broken. I'm not discussing today the purpose behind it, the political and geopolitical ends behind it. But to my mind, what happened over the past few months, and especially the past few weeks, only proved the resilience of your democratic system. I think that the US judiciary and rule of law system has just stood its hardest test in this last presidential election, and I can think of at least 40 years back, which I remember. So would you please comment on that? Because I think the developments, the results in America should be judged by their true and honest value.
Thank you. As you stated, and I think accurately, this was a test that revealed the resiliency of the United States, its strong institutions, and how accepted the democratic process is, even by political opponents. Last Wednesday, on January 20th, we witnessed an orderly and peaceful transfer of power in the United States as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court swore in President Biden. And throughout America's proud history, this ceremony has served as a beacon of democracy and a testament to the enduring strength of our Constitution. By contrast, the violence that we witnessed at the Capitol earlier this month was an intolerable travesty, which is why the Department of Justice has now brought charges against more than 100 individuals and has investigations of many others underway. Over the past few weeks, we've seen friends, family members, coworkers, and others reporting information to the Justice Department about those who were involved in the breach of the Capitol on January 6th. The FBI has received over 200,000 digital tips to date from the public. This shows that the American people have united to fight lawlessness. The American people have shown that they will not allow mob violence to go unanswered. And these subsequent actions reveal that rule of law has and will continue to prevail. That we have a system of laws, not of men, and that those responsible will be held accountable. This is a test that will make the United States more resilient. I think moments of crisis force us to confront our own failings and reconcile them with our values and purpose. And now, more than ever, it's critical that the United States stands up for freedom and rule of law. President Biden called on all Americans to honor our laws and seek the truth. And he said, and I'm going to quote him, "And each of us has a duty and responsibility as citizens, as Americans, and especially as leaders. Leaders who have pledged to honor our Constitution and protect our nation, to defend the truth and defeat the lies." I want to stress that no country is perfect, including us. When we speak out for important issues like human rights, media freedom, or judicial independence, it's not because we're perfect at home. We certainly have lessons to learn. But repairing democracy at home is not incompatible with standing up for democracy abroad. They are mutually reinforcing. It's because we're mindful of the work that we still need to do and that still needed to be done, and because our history has taught us that democracy must be defended if it is going to endure. Our democracy has been tested in the past, and we have always come out stronger. And in the end, I'm confident that democracy has and will continue to prevail.
would you just say? A system of law, not of men.
Yes.
I think that's the most concise and telling recipe, which I would think can serve as a takeaway from our discussion today. It's just a starter, a first sample, so to say, of how we at the Atlantic Club would like to conduct this kind of conversations, because this is what it is. It is a conversation. And as I said, this should be the takeaway from today's conversation: a system of law, not of men. I'd like to thank you so very much, Jessica, because you're the groundbreaker of something which we expect to be an exciting and useful exchange of everything, of experience, of views, of advice, if you wish, with our US counterparts, both here and from the other side of the Atlantic. We expect and hope to bring in interlocutors from America, physical America as well. And thank you for this very telling response to every question we had for you. We will have more in the future. And I only humbly hope that you might want to grant more of your time sometime in the future as well.
With your decades of experience working on the US-Bulgaria bilateral relationship, I appreciate you inviting me to have this conversation with you. And if you'll allow me, I'd just like to conclude with 3 main points. The first is, Bulgaria is one of the United States' top allies, and our alliance is an alliance grounded in our shared values. Bulgaria can become even stronger by upholding its democratic commitments, including on corruption and rule of law. Bulgarians can stop corruption. We're here to help, but ultimately, Bulgaria's strength is our strength. Thank you so much for having me.
Always. This is the floor is open to you, the doors are open to you, the virtual room is open to you, and we will have many more of this. I would also like to thank everybody who joined today. We had a very good attendance, and I believe we will keep it that way in the next series of conversations. Thank you all.